Welcome to Reading Rural, y'all, where we talk about all things rural YA literature and to the rural authors who write it. I'm your host, Dr. Shay Parton, and I'm excited to talk to you about today's topic at hand. If you're a teacher, student, or community member in a rural community, my hope is that the content here honors you and your experiences by discussing and analyzing books that can serve as a mirror for you. If you're an urban or suburban teacher, student, or community member, this series is for you too, and I hope that it can provide nuance to the stereotypical depictions of rural people so often seen in popular media. So come on in, and let's get to it. Of course, no one can promise that your leaves will stay green and the frost doesn't devastate your harvest. Of course, this is only speculation. Fate has a grip on us that even the hardiest sun cannot unshackle. Eden learned this fast when her strawberries met their end on a cold December morning. Ever since she hated winter, she had no control over Gaia's decisions. The cold would be enough to freeze springs and brooks, almost enough to freeze Eden's heart. "Don't give me that look. You're the one who decided to leave the barn," Eden said, fastening a harness on an old brown and white cow. The cow huffed at Eden and slowly followed her as she tugged and basically dragged her back to the barn. Eden took the harness off and smiled at the cow. She snorted at Eden and turned away. "What? I'm not letting you go back outside, silly." Eden stepped towards the cow and suddenly stopped when she heard a hiss. "It's November. You snakes usually go and hide around this time." "Usually not in my barn, because you saw what happened to that ugly black snake last time he got in here." Eden laughed and looked around, but no snakes were in sight. She stepped forward again, and the hissing came back. "Oh, are you under this pile? Best find a new hiding spot before I get you. I need new snake skin for my..." Her rambling quickly got interrupted by a cat jumping from the ceiling in front of her. She screamed and fell backward. Slowly, she raised up and met eyes with the Maine Coon. Hey, and welcome to a very exciting episode of Reading Rural, y'all. Today, I am going to talk about Allison Strange's Rural Teen Writing Contest winning story, Fate for a Cat. First, let's start with a summary. Fate for a Cat follows Eden, our narrator, as she rescues a loose cow from the cold only to find a Maine Coon holed up in her barn. Unable to care for the cat herself, she sets off to find his owner with the help of a neighbor, and we follow her to find out the cat's fate. Thus, the title, Fate for a Cat. Now for some analysis. There are so many things that this story does well. So many things. It's so heartfelt. The tone is warm and inviting. The world of the story is quintessentially rural, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But one of its most striking qualities is the authenticity of Eden's voice. In my interview with Shannon Dittamore, we both talked about how we're both readers of voice and we hope to be writers of voice. And Allison Strange is a writer of voice. Eden's voice just sings and leaps right off the page. I could hear her laughter, and the light, jovial air she had was so palpable and just came across so well on the page. And that's not easy to do. The interaction between Eden and the cat, the conversations they have, were so beautifully crafted. And they really played out like movie scenes, which, after my interview with Allison Strange, makes a lot of sense. And you'll have to stay tuned for that last episode in the series to see what I mean. Aside from that striking quality of Eden's voice, there are several things about this story that really struck me as quintessentially rural, or at the very least related to my experiences as a rural person. The first thing was the need to get cows back in after they've managed to get themselves out. We didn't raise cows. We raised hogs, but we had cows right down the road, and I had several friends who raised cattle. So one of those friends in high school was frequently called on by the office to go home and put her cows back in. And almost every time it was never her cows. It was her neighbor's cows. But she still put them back in anyways because that's what we do, right? Um, and on my last visit home, my youngest brother, who's 20, was telling me about his friend and how one of his cows got out and was just like roaming in adjoining woods. They were using drones and they were still having trouble finding it. Cows just get themselves into these silly predicaments sometimes. So that felt really authentic and true and real. The second thing that I thought was really quintessentially rural was the propensity to have conversations with animals and or plants, especially when doing chores. So if you're doing chores by yourself and like not with your siblings or, you know, not with a friend, um, then the animal or plant sort of becomes your friend. Um, I talk to my chickens all the time when I go out to collect their eggs or feed them or give them water or whatever. Um, I'll talk to the garden plants, like if I'm out working in them by myself. So I thought that felt really relatable and true and real to me. Um, and and it's because um, she writes in the story that it isn't unusual to be stuck with your wit or your spouse or perhaps an old dog. And I really loved that line in the story. Narrating what you're doing as you're doing chores always felt like it made time go faster, especially if you were doing them by yourself. So um, that's another thing that felt really authentic to me about the story. Um, Another thing was the propensity to give more than what you can or really should. So take in more animals or people or give more money or food or time than what is really feasible for a person. I've always said that my family would give you the shirt off their back even if they didn't have one. And I believe that that's true. Um, so that felt really true of rural people and rural experiences. Um, as did the notion that where there's a will, there's a way. At the end of the story, spoiler alert, Eden is considering the possibility of taking on another job in order to provide for this cat that has wandered onto her place and into her barn and into her heart. Where I'm from, you learn to do what it takes. So, for example, when I was in college working at a restaurant that was clearly going under and barely making my rent, my mama, whom I love, so don't judge her too harshly here, called to tell me that it was time to start paying my car insurance, which was the one expense that she had helped me with since I started driving. I had to pay my gas, I had to pay for any maintenance, that kind of stuff, oil changes, which I did myself most of the time. But I had to pay for that kind of stuff, but she would pay my insurance. But when I was in college, she called and told me that it was time for me to start paying it myself. And I started crying on the loading dock because I was having trouble figuring out how I was going to pay my rent. And her response to that was, well, I guess you'll just have to get a second job. So that's exactly what I did. Now, I know that that might seem harsh to some listeners, especially those who didn't come up rural or come up working class, but that was really probably the kindest and most loving thing my mama could have done for me in that moment, according to our culture. So I also really appreciated that about this story, like learning how to find a way to make things work even when it seems like they won't. And then the last thing that I appreciated about this story was the use of rural language markers throughout it. It didn't feel like caricature. It didn't feel exaggerated. It felt natural for the speaker of the story and really read to me like a person talking. So some of the things like best find a new hiding place. I got to ask you something and I felt like that was sass. All of that felt really authentic to rural language practices that I'm familiar with and that I come from. And so I really appreciated that about the story too, because That's also something that's really hard to do. I've talked to several authors about this, about how they choose when and where and how much to use rural language varieties in their stories, and whether or not they have to push back on editors and things like that. So I really appreciated that Allison Strange really worked to use language that felt authentic to her character, to her rural place, and to the rural place of the story. So all of these things together pack a huge punch in this story. The place of it rings true and loud and clear in a way that I think invites rural readers to see themselves in it, even if they don't raise animals, or even if they don't like cats, or even if they don't live in North Carolina, where Allison Strange is from. I mean, I'm, from rural Indiana, but still so much of what she wrote about and crafted in this story was something that I related to. And I think that that's the power of writing, that we don't have to, it doesn't have to be like a perfect one-to-one correlation, but because so much of rurality exists in similarity, even in across different regions. I mean, obviously there are differences. Of course there are. But there are also things about our rural experiences that we can relate to. And I think that Allison Strange's story really draws on those things, which I think the judges really felt and connected with, along with the voice of Eden and how well crafted it was. So, I really appreciated it all. I really love this story, and am grateful to Allison Strange for submitting it to this contest, and to the judges for giving great feedback and careful consideration to all of the stories. So shout out to J.R. Jameson and Vita Bybee. Thank you again so much for donating your time and efforts in judging these stories. If you haven't read Fate for a Cat yet and want to see what I mean, there's a link in the description below, and I hope you'll join me for the next episode, where I will be talking about how rural teachers could use, or non-rural teachers could use, Allison Strange's story in their classrooms, because I think they absolutely could, and I think I absolutely would if I was still in my rural Indiana classroom. And I think students would appreciate that. Not only are they reading a story that showcases an experience that is similar to theirs, but they're also reading it written by somebody who is in their age range. And if teachers treat it like real writing, because it is real writing, then students can feel that the power they have in their voice, and the power that they have in telling their story. And so I think that that's really important. So I am going to be talking about that in the next video, and then the video after that will be the interview that I did with Allison Strange, which was lovely and wonderful, and I'm excited for y'all to be able to hear from her. So I hope you'll stay tuned for those episodes and check those out. In the meantime, as always, like, comment, subscribe, share, and hopefully y'all are using these stories in your classrooms, and encouraging the young rural writers in your lives to submit to next year's contest. Well, I hope y'all enjoyed this week's episode. If you like what you heard and want to support the show and keep it a viable endeavor for me, it'd be great if you would like and comment on the YouTube episode. You could talk about what you liked most or what you walked away with. It'd also help if you'd subscribe to the channel. You can also head over to the Support Us page on the Literacy in Place website. There you can learn about all the different ways you can support this work. Like, you can like and follow the website itself, find out where to engage with us via social media, and go leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Or you could shop our storefront on bookshop.org to get the book featured in this episode, or any other books that catch your eye. You could also buy us a coffee at ko-fi.com and donate once, or set up a recurring donation. All of this would be immensely helpful in keeping this show going. So thanks a bunch for doing what you can. Well, that's it for this episode. Until next time, y'all come back now, would ya?